Adunni's hands trembled as she pushed open the bedroom door of their Lagos penthouse, expecting to find her husband Kimi resting after his supposed business trip. Instead, she found him tangled in silk sheets with her younger sister Folake, their bodies intertwined in a moment of domestic betrayal so raw it knocked the breath from her lungs. "Kimi!" The scream tore from her throat like a wounded animal. Her phone clattered to the marble floor as both figures scrambled apart, Folake's perfectly manicured nails clutching the bedsheet to her chest while Kimi's eyes went wide with the panic of a caught thief. What would you do if you walked in on this scene of infidelity in marriage? Hit like if you've ever been betrayed, and comment below where you're watching from. Adunni had built this life brick by brick. At 35, she was the successful owner of 3 boutique shops across Victoria Island, the woman who had put Kimi through law school, who had bought this very penthouse overlooking the Lagos Lagoon. She was the one who sent money to both their families every month, who carried the burden of the house while everyone else lived comfortably off her success. "Sister, it's not what you think," Folake started, her voice small and pathetic. "Not what I think." Adunni's voice rose to a pitch that could shatter glass. "You're naked in my bed, in my house, with my husband, and it's not what I think." Kimi finally found his voice, fumbling for his boxer shorts with the desperation of a drowning man reaching for driftwood. "Adunni, baby, let me explain. This was a mistake, a moment of weakness." "A moment?" Adunni laughed, a sound devoid of any humor. "How long has this emotional manipulation been going on? How long have you two been making a fool of me?" The silence that followed was deafening. In that moment, Adunni saw her entire world for what it truly was, a carefully constructed lie built on her money, her sweat, her blind trust in the people she loved most. Folake slipped past her toward the door, clutching her clothes, but Adunni's voice froze her in place. "Where do you think you're going, sister? We need to have a family meeting." The phrase dripped with venom because Adunni knew something neither of them suspected. She had cameras installed throughout the house just last month after noticing small things going missing. Every moment of their cheating spouse betrayal was recorded in crystal clear high definition. As Kimi scrambled to put on his clothes, babbling apologies and excuses, Adunni pulled out her backup phone, the one neither of them knew about. With a few taps, she uploaded the most damaging footage to a cloud server, her fingers steady despite the earthquake in her chest. "You want to know what's really interesting?" she said, her voice now deadly calm. "I've been getting anonymous messages for weeks. Someone's been trying to warn me about this African marriage drama playing out right under my nose." Kimi's face went ashen. "What messages?" Adunni smiled, but it was the smile of a predator who had just cornered her prey. "Photos, Kimi. Videos. Timestamps. Someone's been watching you too, and now I know why." But as she scrolled through her phone, her blood ran cold. There, in her message history, was proof of something far worse than simple infidelity. Bank statements, property transfers, legal documents she'd never seen before. While she'd been working herself to the bone, Kimi hadn't just been cheating on her, he'd been systematically stealing from her, transferring assets, preparing to leave her with nothing. The mahogany conference table in Adunni's lawyer's office felt cold beneath her palms as she spread out the evidence she'd gathered over the past 72 hours. Barrister Chinwezu, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, studied each document with the focused intensity of a surgeon. "This is extensive," Chinwezu said, adjusting her reading glasses. "Your husband has been transferring funds for over 8 months. The property in Ikoyi, the investment accounts, even the shares in your boutiques, he's been moving everything into joint accounts with your sister." Adunni's stomach churned. While she'd been grieving the simple betrayal of an affair, Kimi and Folake had been orchestrating her complete financial destruction. This wasn't just cheating, this was a calculated heist disguised as domestic betrayal. "How much?" Adunni's voice came out as a whisper. "Nearly 80% of your liquid assets. If these transfers had been completed, you would have been left with virtually nothing except debt and your remaining boutique on the mainland." The irony wasn't lost on Adunni. She, the mocked child who had carried the burden of the house, supporting everyone around her since she was 22, was about to be reduced to poverty by the very people she'd lifted up. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Adunni, Folake says you threw her out over some misunderstanding with Kimi. You know your sister has always been sensitive. Why can't you just forgive and move on? Family is family." Even now, even with the truth staring everyone in the face, she was being painted as the unreasonable one. The successful sister who couldn't handle her husband's little mistake. The pattern was so familiar it made her teeth ache. "There's more," Chinwezu continued, sliding another folder across the table. I had my investigator dig deeper. Your sister Folake isn't just having an affair with your husband. She's pregnant. The world tilted sideways. Adunni gripped the edge of the table as the full scope of their deception crashed over her like a Lagos flood. Pregnant. 3 months along, according to the medical records we obtained. Which means this affair has been going on since before your wedding anniversary celebration in January. Adunni remembered that celebration, how she'd paid for everything, how grateful Kimi had seemed, how Folake had helped her plan every detail while sleeping with her husband behind her back. The co-parenting conflict she was about to face would be just another layer of this nightmare. But here's where it gets interesting, Chinwezu said, her voice taking on the tone of someone about to deliver checkmate. The property transfers require your signature to be legally binding. And the signatures they forged? They're sloppy. Very sloppy. A spark of something dangerous ignited in Adunni's chest. What are you saying? I'm saying we can not only stop these transfers, we can have them both arrested for fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. But Chinwezu paused dramatically. There might be a more satisfying approach. Adunni leaned forward. I'm listening. Your husband is a lawyer, but he's been careless. Arrogant. He left digital footprints everywhere, emails, text messages, bank records. If we play this right, we can not only recover your assets, we can destroy his career and reputation in the process. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the law office, Adunni could see the bustling streets of Lagos, people going about their daily lives unaware of the revenge story unfolding 30 floors above them. Somewhere out there, Kimi was probably reassuring Folake that his wife would eventually calm down, that money could fix everything, that Adunni was too soft-hearted to really fight back. They were about to learn how wrong they were. What's the first step? Adunni asked. Chinwezu smiled like a shark scenting blood. We let them think they've won. We let them complete their plan. And then we spring the trap. But as Adunni was about to respond, her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. When she answered, a gravelly male voice said, Mrs. Adunni, you don't know me, but I have information about your husband that goes much deeper than you realize. There are other women, other families. Meet me tonight if you want to know the truth about who you really married. The dimly lit cafe in Ikeja felt like an unlikely setting for earth-shattering revelations, but Adunni had learned that betrayal often wore the most ordinary disguises. Across from her sat Emeka, a private investigator with weathered hands and eyes that had seen too much of humanity's darker nature. I've been tracking your husband for 6 months, he said, sliding a thick manila envelope across the small table. Not for you, for another woman. A woman named Bukola in Abuja who hired me to investigate the man she'd been sending money to for 3 years. Adunni's world, already shattered, somehow found new ways to break. Another woman. 3 women, actually. Your sister Folake is just the latest. There's Bukola in Abuja, a banker who's been supporting him. Zainab in Kano, who owns a textile business. And Ngozi in Port Harcourt, who runs a successful catering company. Emeka's voice was matter-of-fact, as if he was reading a grocery list rather than describing systematic emotional manipulation spanning half of Nigeria. They all think they're his only woman. They all think the other relationships in his life are just business arrangements or family obligations. And they're all successful women who've been financially supporting him. Adunni opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside were photographs, bank statements, love letters, and legal documents that painted a picture so grotesque she almost couldn't process it. Kimi wasn't just a cheating spouse, he was a professional con artist who specialized in targeting successful African women. The pregnancy, she managed to ask. Folake's not the only one. Bukola is 4 months along. She's been planning to leave her husband in Abuja to marry Kimi. She has no idea he's already married to you. The cafe suddenly felt too small, too airless. Adunni pushed back from the table, her chest tight with rage and something approaching panic. Why are you telling me this? Because Bukola hired me to find out why Kimi keeps postponing their wedding. She's getting suspicious, asking questions. When I discovered his other relationships, I realized this was bigger than one woman being cheated on. This is a criminal enterprise. Emeka leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. But here's the thing, Mrs. Adunni. You're the only legal wife. You're the only one whose assets he can actually steal. The others are just funding his lifestyle, but you're the real target. The endgame. Adunni's phone buzzed with a message from Folake. Sister, please call me. I know you're hurt, but there's something you need to know about Kimi. Something dangerous. I think we're both in trouble. The irony was suffocating. Now Folake wanted to play the concerned sister, probably after discovering she wasn't Kimi's only side piece. The same sister who had helped orchestrate her public disgrace was now reaching out for protection. There's more, Emeka continued, producing another folder. Kimi's been using your businesses as collateral for loans you don't know about. Loans he's been taking to fund his relationships with these other women. If he disappears tomorrow, you'll be left with debt that could bankrupt everything you've built. The full scope of the trap became clear. While she'd been the mocked child who carried the burden of the house, Kimi had been using that very burden to finance his betrayals. Every naira she'd earned, every sacrifice she'd made, had been feeding the machine of her own destruction. But I have good news, Emeka said, his expression shifting from grim to predatory. Bukola, the woman from Abuja. She's not just angry, she's connected. Her brother is a federal prosecutor. When I told her what I'd discovered, she didn't just want revenge. She wanted justice. Adunni's pulse quickened. What kind of justice? The kind that involves multiple counts of fraud, bigamy, and financial crimes across state lines. The kind that puts people in federal prison for a very long time. Through the cafe window, Adunni watched Lagos traffic crawl through the evening heat, ordinary people heading home to their ordinary lives, unaware that just a few feet away, a woman was learning that her entire existence had been a carefully constructed lie. Her phone rang. Kimi's name flashed on the screen. She looked at Emeka, who nodded encouragingly. This was her chance to start controlling the narrative, to begin the delicate process of gathering evidence while pretending to be the devastated, confused wife. She answered with a voice carefully calibrated to sound broken and lost. Kimi. Baby, thank God. We need to talk. There are things happening, things I need to tell you. Can you meet me at home tonight? Please. The Lagos penthouse felt like a crime scene as Adunni stepped through the front door, her senses hyper-alert to every detail. Kimi sat on their cream-colored sofa, still wearing the expensive suit she'd bought him for his law firm promotion, a promotion that, she now realized, probably didn't exist. Thank you for coming, he said, standing with the practiced charm that had once made her heart flutter. Now it just made her skin crawl. Talk, Adunni said, remaining by the door. She'd left it unlocked, as Emeka had instructed. If this meeting went sideways, help was just a phone call away. Kimi's composure cracked slightly. I know how it looked yesterday. I know you're hurt. But baby, you have to understand, Folake seduced me. She's been throwing herself at me for months, and I'm just a man, I have weaknesses. Stop. Adunni's voice cut through his rehearsed explanation like a blade. Just stop lying to me. Something flickered across Kimi's face, surprise, maybe, or calculation. I'm not lying. I'm trying to explain. I know about Bukola. The silence that followed was deafening. Kimi's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, fear, and finally, a cold mask that she'd never seen before. In that moment, the man she thought she'd married disappeared entirely, replaced by a stranger with empty eyes. I don't know what you think you know, he said slowly. I know about Zainab in Kano. I know about Ngozi in Port Harcourt. I know about the money transfers, the forged signatures, the loans against my businesses. Adunni's voice remained steady even as her heart hammered against her ribs. I know about all of it, Kimi. The transformation was instantaneous. The pleading, apologetic husband vanished, replaced by something predatory and calculating. When he spoke again, his voice carried a menace that made her step closer to the door. You know what your problem has always been, Adunni? You think your money makes you smart. You think because you can run some little boutiques, you understand how the world really works. My little boutiques that have been funding your entire lifestyle for 5 years. Kimi laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. Funding. Baby, I've been managing your money. Investing it. Growing it. Those women you think I've been cheating with? They're business partners. Everything I've done has been to secure our future. The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, that for a moment Adunni almost doubted her own reality. This was how he'd operated for so long, taking her success and reframing it as his management, taking his betrayals and reframing them as business opportunities. Business partners who are pregnant with your children. Another flicker across his features, quickly suppressed. Folake made a mistake. The pregnancy test was wrong. She's just scared and confused. But Adunni had seen the medical records. Multiple pregnancies, multiple women, multiple lies stacked so high they threatened to collapse under their own weight. "I want a divorce," she said quietly. "No." The word came out flat and final. "You don't." "Excuse me." Kimi stood up, straightening his suit jacket with deliberate calm. "You want to know what you want, Adunni? You want to forgive me. You want to work on our marriage. You want to be the supportive wife who helps her husband through a difficult time. And why would I want that?" His smile was razor-thin. "Because if you don't, I'll destroy you. Not just financially, though I certainly can do that. I'll destroy your reputation, your family relationships, your business connections. Do you think your mother will believe you or her precious youngest daughter? Do you think your customers will keep shopping at the boutiques owned by the crazy woman who falsely accused her husband of running a criminal enterprise?" The threat hung in the air like smoke from a fire. This was the real Kimi, the man who had been hiding behind charm and manipulation for years. This was the man who saw her success not as partnership but as resources to be exploited. "You're threatening me in my own house," Adunni said, her voice dangerously quiet. "I'm protecting us. Both of us. You're emotional right now, not thinking clearly. When you calm down, you'll see that forgiveness is the only way forward." Adunni's phone buzzed with a text message. As she glanced at it, her blood ran cold. It was a photo of her mother's house in Ibadan, taken just hours earlier. The message read, "Beautiful family home. Would be a shame if something happened to disrupt the peace there." The co-parenting conflict she'd been worried about was nothing compared to this escalation. Kimi wasn't just a cheating spouse, he was dangerous. "Did you just threaten my mother?" she whispered. Kimi's expression didn't change. "I don't know what you're talking about. But accidents happen, Adunni. Especially to people who make poor choices about who they trust and what they believe." That's when Adunni realized the most terrifying truth of all. She wasn't just dealing with domestic betrayal or financial fraud. She was dealing with someone who would hurt her family to maintain control over her life and assets. Her phone rang. Unknown number again. The voice on the phone was female, urgent, and terrified. "Mrs. Adunni, this is Bukola from Abuja. We need to talk immediately. Kimi is planning something terrible, and we're all in danger." Standing in her own living room with her husband's threatening smile burning into her consciousness, Adunni felt the final pieces of a horrific puzzle clicking into place. "I can't talk right now," she said carefully, aware that Kimi was watching her every move. "Then listen carefully." Bukola's voice was barely above a whisper. "Get out of that house. No. Don't pack anything, don't explain, just leave. I'm sending you an address. There are others here who need to see you." The call ended, and immediately Adunni's phone pinged with a location in Victoria Island. Another ping followed with a photo that made her stomach drop, her sister Folake, bruised and crying, in what looked like a hospital room. Kimi was still talking, spinning more lies about business partnerships and emotional manipulation, but his words faded to white noise as the reality of her situation crystallized. He wasn't just stealing her money or cheating on her. He was escalating to violence, and she was standing alone in an isolated penthouse with a man who had just threatened her family. "I need some air," Adunni said, moving toward the balcony. "We're not finished talking," Kimi said, but his voice had lost its confident edge. "Yes, we are." She stepped onto the balcony overlooking Lagos Lagoon, her mind racing through escape routes. The penthouse was on the 40th floor, no chance of climbing down. The elevator required a key card to access their floor, and Kimi controlled that access. But there was a service elevator that led to the parking garage, if she could reach it. "Adunni, come back inside. We need to finish this conversation." She turned to find Kimi standing in the balcony doorway, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked genuinely unhinged. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled, and his eyes held a wildness that suggested he was capable of anything. "What happened to Folake?" she asked. "What do you mean?" "The photo I just received. She's in a hospital. What did you do to her?" Kimi's laugh was harsh and brittle. "Your sister learned what happens when people don't follow the script. She started asking too many questions, making demands about the pregnancy, threatening to tell you everything. So I educated her about the consequences of disloyalty." The admission hit Adunni like a physical blow. He had hurt Folake, her sister who, despite her betrayal, was carrying his child and was now paying the price for getting in too deep with a man none of them had truly understood. "You hit a pregnant woman," Adunni said, her voice hollow with disgust. "I corrected a mistake before it became a bigger problem. The same way I'm going to correct this little rebellion of yours. Kimi stepped closer, and Adunni realized she had nowhere to run. The balcony was a dead end, and he was blocking her only path back into the house. But she'd underestimated the extent of her own preparation. Hidden in her bra was a small device Emeka had given her, a panic button connected directly to a private security firm. She'd thought it was overkill when he'd insisted she carry it, but now her finger found the button and pressed it firmly. Somewhere in Lagos, help was being dispatched. The thing about successful women, Kimi said, his voice taking on a lecturing tone, is that they always think they're smarter than they actually are. You think you've discovered something that changes everything, but you've just uncovered the natural order. Men lead, women follow, and money flows to whoever is strong enough to take it. Is that what you told Bukola? Zainab? Ngozi? His expression darkened. Bukola is no longer a concern. Neither are the others. You're going to call your lawyer tomorrow and tell her you've changed your mind about the divorce. You're going to restore my access to all accounts, and you're going to publicly reconcile with your sister. Any deviation from this script will result in consequences you won't like. Through the glass doors behind him, Adunni saw movement in the hallway. Security had arrived faster than expected, or perhaps Emeka had been monitoring the situation more closely than she'd realized. What if I refuse? She asked, stalling for time. Then your mother's house burns down with her in it, your boutiques suffer a series of unfortunate accidents, and you discover just how alone you really are in this world. But Kimi's threats were interrupted by the sound of their front door being kicked in. Male voices shouted commands, and suddenly the penthouse filled with uniformed security officers and what looked like federal agents. In the chaos that followed, as Kimi was wrestled to the ground and handcuffed, Adunni heard him screaming about his rights, about false accusations, about how she would pay for this betrayal. But the most chilling moment came as they dragged him toward the elevator. He looked back at her with a smile that promised this wasn't over, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "You have no idea how deep this goes, wife. No idea what you've just started." The private hospital room in Victoria Island felt like a war council meeting as 5 women sat in a circle, each one representing a different piece of Kimi's elaborate deception. Folake lay propped up in the hospital bed, her face a canvas of purple bruises, while Bukola, Zainab, and Ngozi occupied the visitor chairs. Adunni stood by the window, still processing the scope of betrayal that had brought them all together. "He told me you were his business partner," Bukola said, her voice hoarse from crying. "Said the marriage was just for show, to help with his law practice. I sent him 2 million naira over 3 years. He told me you were his sister," Zainab added, her Hausa accent thick with emotion. "Said your boutiques were family businesses he was helping to manage. I invested 4 million in what I thought were expansion opportunities." Ngozi, the youngest of the group at 28, looked shell-shocked. "He said all of you were clients. That he was helping successful women protect their assets from jealous relatives. I gave him access to my catering company's accounts to diversify my holdings." The numbers alone were staggering, over 15 million naira in total, all flowing from successful African women into Kimi's personal accounts. But the emotional manipulation was even more devastating. Each woman had been told a different story, each made to feel special and chosen, each convinced she was helping the man she loved build a better future. "How many others are there?" Adunni asked. "At least 7 that we know of," Bukola replied, consulting notes on her phone. "My brother, the prosecutor, has been investigating. There are women in Ghana, Côte d'Ivoire, and South Africa. This operation crosses international borders." Folake spoke for the first time since Adunni had arrived. "He never loved any of us. We were just resources." The word hung in the air like a curse. Resources. That's all their dreams, ambitions, and success had meant to him, fuel for his lifestyle and his ego. "But here's what I don't understand," Adunni said, turning from the window. "Why did he escalate to violence now? If the system was working, if we were all sending money and staying quiet, why risk exposure by hurting people?" Bukola and Folake exchanged a look that made Adunni's stomach tighten. "Because something changed," Bukola said slowly. "Someone was putting pressure on him. Someone he was more afraid of than he was of us." "What do you mean?" Folake struggled to sit up straighter, wincing with pain. "Before he hit me, he was on the phone. Screaming at someone, begging. I heard him say, 'I need more time, the transfers aren't complete yet, she's getting suspicious.' He was reporting to someone," Zainab said, her business mind immediately grasping the implications. "This wasn't just his operation. He was working for someone else." The hospital room fell silent as the full horror of their situation became clear. They weren't just victims of one man's greed and manipulation, they were casualties in a larger criminal enterprise that treated successful African women as targets to be systematically exploited. Adunni's phone rang. Emeka's number. "The police have been asking questions," he said without preamble. "Kimi's not talking, but his phone records are interesting. Lots of calls to a number registered to a company called Continental Investment Holdings. Ring any bells?" The name sent ice through Adunni's veins. "That's the company that's been trying to buy my buildings. They've been pressuring me for months, offering way below market value, getting aggressive when I refused." It gets worse. Continental Investment Holdings is owned by someone you know. Someone who's had access to all of your business information for years. "Who?" "Your accountant. Mr. Tijani." The betrayal cut deeper than anything that had come before. Tijani had been handling her finances for 8 years. He knew every aspect of her business, every asset, every vulnerability. He'd been in her house, at her dinner table, had been like an uncle to her. "He's been feeding information to Kimi's handlers," Emeka continued. "Bank statements, business valuations, personal details about your family. You weren't randomly targeted, Adunni. You were studied, analyzed, and then systematically harvested." Through the hospital room window, Adunni could see the Lagos skyline glittering in the evening light, millions of people going about their lives, unaware that predators moved among them with such sophisticated cruelty. "There's more," Emeka said, his voice grim. "Tijani emptied his office 3 hours ago. Took everything. Bank records, client files, computer hard drives. He's running." Adunni looked around the room at the other women, successful, intelligent, accomplished women who had been reduced to victims by men who saw their achievements as weaknesses to exploit. But in their faces, she saw something else emerging. Not just pain, but rage. Not just betrayal, but determination. "What do we do?" Bukola asked. Before Adunni could answer, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "You think you've won because you put Kimi in jail? This is just the beginning. Continental Investment Holdings has investors who don't like their plans being disrupted. Sleep well tonight, it might be your last chance." But this time, instead of fear, Adunni felt something else rising in her chest. These people had made one critical mistake. They had assumed that successful African women would remain isolated, ashamed, and silent when victimized. They had never considered what would happen if those women found each other, shared their resources, and decided to fight back. The boardroom at Adunni's largest boutique had been transformed into a command center. Laptops hummed on the polished conference table, documents covered every surface, and the 5 women who had been Kimi's victims now sat as co-conspirators in what Bukola had dubbed Operation Reclamation. Continental Investment Holdings has 12 front companies, Bukola announced, her prosecutors training evident in her methodical presentation. They target successful women across West Africa, using men like Kimi to infiltrate their personal lives while accountants like Tijani provide the financial intelligence. Zainab, her textile business experience making her the expert on supply chains and logistics, had mapped the money flows. They're not just stealing from individuals. They're systematically acquiring property, businesses, and assets to launder money from other criminal activities. "We weren't victims, we were strategic targets in a much larger operation." The scope of the conspiracy was breathtaking. What had started as personal betrayal had revealed itself as an international criminal enterprise that had been operating across multiple countries for years, leaving devastated women and broken families in its wake. "I've been thinking about revenge," Ngozi said quietly. "But this isn't about revenge anymore. It's about stopping them from doing this to other women." Adunni nodded, surprised by how calm she felt despite the magnitude of what they were facing. Tijani made a mistake when he ran. He took the files, but he also broke cover. Now we know this is bigger than just Kimi, and we have evidence of the larger network. Folake, still pale but determined to contribute from her wheelchair, spoke up. "I've been going through Kimi's messages on the phone he thought I didn't know about. There are other women, Adunni. Women who are still being targeted right now, sending money, trusting men who are going to destroy them." The weight of responsibility settled over the room. They weren't just fighting for justice for themselves, they were potentially the only thing standing between other women and the same devastating betrayal they had experienced. "So what's our plan?" Bukola asked. Adunni stood up, moving to the window that overlooked Victoria Island's business district. Somewhere out there, Continental Investment Holdings was probably regrouping, planning their next move, confident that a group of emotional women would never pose a real threat to their sophisticated operation. They were about to learn how wrong they were. "We're going to do what they never expected," she said, turning back to face the group. "We're going to use our success against them. Bukola, your brother's federal connections. Zainab, your international business networks. Ngozi, your social media reach and customer base. My retail operations and property holdings. We're going to turn everything they saw as weaknesses into weapons." "How?" Zainab asked. "We're going to out-professional them. Out-resource them. Out-network them." Adunni's voice grew stronger with each word. "They've been treating us like isolated targets, but we're actually connected to hundreds of other successful women across Africa. Women who have resources, influence, and a very good reason to want to protect themselves from exactly this kind of predation." Bukola's eyes lit up with understanding. "A network. Not just for revenge, but for protection and prevention." "Exactly. We document everything, expose the entire operation, and create a system that warns other women and helps them protect themselves." But even as they planned, Adunni's phone was buzzing with increasingly threatening messages. Photos of her mother's house, her boutiques, even the hospital where Folake was staying. Continental Investment Holdings was escalating their intimidation campaign, clearly hoping to break their resolve before they could cause real damage. "They're scared," Folake observed, reading over Adunni's shoulder. "They wouldn't be threatening us if they thought we were powerless." That's when Adunni's phone rang with a call that changed everything. The caller ID showed her mother's number, but the voice that answered was unfamiliar and menacing. "Mrs. Adunni Okafor. This is a friend of your accountant, Mr. Tijani. Your mother is enjoying our hospitality right now. Such a lovely woman. It would be unfortunate if anything happened to her because her daughter couldn't follow simple instructions." The blood drained from Adunni's face. Around the table, the other women went silent as they realized the stakes had just escalated beyond financial fraud and emotional manipulation. "What do you want?" Adunni asked, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. "You're going to call your prosecutor friend's brother and tell him there's been a misunderstanding. You're going to withdraw all complaints against Mr. Kimi and apologize publicly for the false accusations. You have 6 hours." The line went dead. For a moment, the room was completely silent. Then Bukola spoke, her voice filled with cold fury. "They just made this personal for all of us. What do we do?" Ngozi asked. Adunni looked around the table at these women who had become more than fellow victims. They had become her sisters in a fight that was now literally life and death. She thought about her mother, probably terrified and confused, paying the price for her daughter's success and independence. But she also thought about all the other mothers, sisters, and daughters who would suffer if Continental Investment Holdings was allowed to continue operating. "We finish what we started," she said quietly. "But first, we save my mother." The abandoned warehouse in Apapa looked like a setting from a nightmare, but Adunni approached it with the calculated precision of a woman who had spent the last week learning to think like her enemies. Hidden in her clothing were 3 recording devices, 2 GPS trackers, and a direct communication link to the task force that Bukola's brother had assembled. "You came alone, as instructed," said a voice from the shadows as she entered the cavernous space. A man emerged, tall, well-dressed, with a kind of confidence that came from years of successful intimidation. "Very smart." "Where's my mother?" Adunni demanded. "Safe. Comfortable. Probably having better accommodations than she's used to." His smile was designed to humiliate. "Mr. Tijani speaks very highly of your family's modest background. It must be nice for your mother to see how the other half lives." The casual cruelty was calculated to make her angry, to cloud her judgment. Instead, Adunni felt the icy calm of someone who had moved beyond fear into something far more dangerous. "What exactly do you want?" "Nothing complicated. You withdraw the charges against Mr. Kimi. You publicly apologize for the misunderstanding. You restore his access to your accounts. And most importantly, you convince your new friends to do the same." "And if I refuse?" The man gestured toward a corner of the warehouse where Adunni could now see her mother tied to a chair, looking small and frightened but mercifully unharmed. Beside her stood another man holding what looked like a gasoline can. "Accidents happen, Mrs. Okafor. Especially to elderly women who wander into dangerous neighborhoods." But what the man didn't know was that his every word was being transmitted to federal agents positioned around the warehouse. What he couldn't see was that Adunni's apparent isolation was an illusion. She was the most protected person in Lagos at that moment. I need proof she's unharmed, Adunni said. Of course. He nodded to his associate, who untied her mother and allowed her to stand. Mama, Adunni called out, using the code phrase they had agreed on. Are you feeling better today? Her mother, despite her fear, remembered the instructions Bukola had given her over the phone that morning. Yes, my daughter. I'm feeling much stronger now. The phrase was a signal that she understood this was a rescue operation, not a surrender. What happened next unfolded with the precision of a military operation. Federal agents burst through every entrance simultaneously, the warehouse filled with shouts and commands, and within minutes both men were on the ground in handcuffs. But as Adunni ran to embrace her mother, the man who had been threatening them looked up from the concrete floor with a smile that made her blood freeze. You think this ends here, he said. You think we haven't been planning for this exact scenario? Your little network of women just painted targets on all their backs. Everyone they love, everyone they care about, everyone in their families is now fair game. Through her earpiece, Adunni heard Bukola's panicked voice. They just took Zainab's daughter from her school in Kano. Ngozi's catering business is on fire. This was a distraction, Adunni. While we were focused on rescuing your mother, they were hitting everyone else. The man on the ground was laughing now, despite the federal agent securing his hands behind his back. Did you really think a few successful women could take down an operation that's been running for 15 years? We have resources you can't imagine, connections you'll never understand, and patience you'll never match. As they dragged him away, he called out one last threat. Your mother is safe tonight, but what about tomorrow? What about next week? What about when we come for your sister's children, your friends' parents, your employees' families? How many people are you willing to sacrifice for your pride? Adunni helped her shaken mother to the waiting ambulance, her mind racing. They had won this battle, rescued her mother, and gathered evidence that would put several criminals in prison. But the war was far from over, and now it was clear that Continental Investment Holdings had resources and reach beyond anything they had imagined. As the warehouse lights faded behind them, Adunni realized the most terrifying truth of all: they couldn't protect everyone they loved, and their enemies knew it. Her phone buzzed with messages from the other women, each reporting new attacks, new threats, new escalations. The successful African women who had thought they could fight back were learning that some fights came with consequences that extended far beyond themselves. But in her mother's tired eyes, Adunni saw something that gave her hope. Not fear, despite everything she had endured, but pride. Pride in her daughter who had refused to be broken, who had fought back, who had chosen to stand up rather than submit. What happens now, my daughter? Her mother asked quietly. Adunni looked out at the Lagos skyline, thinking of all the women across Africa who were still being targeted, still being exploited, still being told that their success made them vulnerable rather than powerful. Now we show them what happens when they threaten our families, she said. The Lagos International Conference Center buzzed with an energy that reminded Adunni of electricity before a storm. 300 successful African women from across the continent had responded to her invitation for an emergency business security summit, but what they had really come for was war. Ladies, Adunni began, her voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium, we are under attack. On the massive screen behind her, photos flashed: Kimi, Tijani, the men from the warehouse, and dozens of others. Bank records, legal documents, communication intercepts, and victim testimonies painted a picture of systematic predation that had been operating across 12 African countries. Continental Investment Holdings has stolen over 2 billion naira from women just like us, she continued. But more than that, they have targeted our families, our children, our parents. They have used our love, our trust, and our success as weapons against us. In the front row sat Bukola, Zainab, Ngozi, and Folake, her sisters in survival who had become generals in this fight. Behind them, hundreds of faces reflected the same mix of rage and determination that had sustained them through the darkest weeks of their lives. But here's what they didn't understand, Adunni said, her voice rising. When you attack one successful African woman, you're not attacking an isolated target. You're attacking a network of sisters, mothers, daughters, and friends who have resources, connections, and the will to fight back. The applause was thunderous, but Adunni raised her hand for quiet. Today, we're not just sharing our stories. We're launching something that will make it impossible for operations like Continental Investment Holdings to ever target us again. The screen shifted to show a sophisticated website and mobile app. The African Women's Security Network. Real-time alerts about suspicious individuals and companies. Background checks on anyone trying to access our businesses or personal lives. Legal resources, investigation services, and most importantly, a promise that no woman who joins this network will ever face these predators alone. Bukola stood up to address the crowd. In the past month, working together, we have secured the arrest of 47 individuals across 8 countries. We have frozen over 500 million naira in stolen assets. And we have warned over 2,000 women who are currently being targeted. The crowd erupted again, but Adunni knew the celebration was premature. Even as they spoke, Continental Investment Holdings was adapting, evolving, finding new ways to exploit the vulnerabilities that came with success and independence. That's when her phone buzzed with a message that made her blood run cold. "Impressive presentation, Mrs. Okafor. But you're about to learn that some games are played at levels you can't even imagine. Check the financial markets." Adunni quickly pulled up news sites on her phone, and what she saw made her stomach drop. Her boutique chain stock, which had gone public just 2 years earlier, was crashing. Massive sell-offs, coordinated attacks on social media questioning her business practices, rumors of financial impropriety spreading like wildfire. "They're not just targeting us personally anymore," she announced to the crowd, her voice cutting through the celebration. "They're going after our businesses, our livelihoods, our economic power itself." The screen filled with real-time stock tickers, social media feeds, and news alerts showing systematic attacks on businesses owned by women throughout the room. Continental Investment Holdings wasn't just a criminal organization, it was an economic warfare operation designed to destroy African women's financial independence. "But you know what?" Adunni said, her voice growing stronger as she watched the faces in the crowd shift from celebration to grim determination. "They just made their biggest mistake." She gestured to the audience. "Every woman in this room controls supply chains, has international connections, manages investment portfolios, and influences consumer behavior across this continent. They wanted economic warfare. They're about to learn what happens when 300 of Africa's most successful businesswomen coordinate their economic power." What followed was the most intense 2 hours of Adunni's life. Phone calls were made, investments were shifted, supply contracts were cancelled and redirected, social media campaigns were launched, and the full economic might of successful African women was focused like a laser on Continental Investment Holdings and every business connected to them. By evening, 12 companies had lost major contracts, 3 banks had frozen suspicious accounts, and the coordinated attack on the women's businesses had been not just repelled but reversed into a devastating counter-assault. But as the conference center emptied and Adunni stood with her core team reviewing the day's victories, Emeka approached with an expression that made her heart sink. "They've escalated again," he said quietly. "Continental Investment Holdings just issued a statement claiming you're all part of a terrorist organization designed to destabilize African economies. They're calling for international intervention to stop you." The accusation was absurd, but Adunni realized the genius of it. By framing their defensive actions as economic terrorism, Continental Investment Holdings was trying to turn governments against them, to make their network illegal, to isolate them internationally. "What's worse," Emeka continued, "they filed lawsuits in 5 countries claiming you manipulated markets and violated international trade agreements. Even if the charges are false, the legal costs alone could bankrupt most of your businesses." Standing in the empty conference center, surrounded by the evidence of their temporary victory, Adunni realized they were facing an enemy with resources and sophistication beyond anything she had imagined. The fight that had started with catching her husband cheating had evolved into an international conflict that could destroy everything she and these women had built. But as she looked at Bukola, Zainab, Ngozi, and Folake, she saw the same determination in their eyes that had sustained them through every previous escalation. "Let them come," she said quietly. "We've already proven they can't break us. Now let's prove they can't stop us." 6 months later, Adunni stood in the boardroom of what was now the headquarters of the African Women's Security Network, looking out at a transformed Lagos skyline. The legal battles had been brutal, the international pressure intense, and the personal cost devastating. But they had not just survived, they had fundamentally changed the game. "The Swiss banks released the final reports this morning," Bukola announced, entering the room with a thick folder. "Continental Investment Holdings assets across 14 countries have been completely frozen. Total recovery, 3.7 billion naira returned to victims." "And the arrests?" Zainab asked from her video conference screen in Kano. 68 people in custody across 12 countries, Ngozi reported from Port Harcourt. "Including the senior leadership we thought we'd never reach." Folake, now recovered and stronger than ever, smiled from her chair. "The pregnancy is going well, and I've decided to keep the baby. Not because of Kimi, he'll never see this child, but because something good should come from all this pain." Adunni nodded, her heart full of pride for the woman her sister had become through this ordeal. The domestic betrayal that had started everything seemed like a lifetime ago, though the scars still reminded her daily of how close she had come to losing everything. But the real victory, Adunni said, pulling up statistics on the wall screen, is this: 15,000 women have joined the network. We've prevented over 400 scams before they could destroy lives. And we've created a system that makes it impossible for operations like Continental Investment Holdings to target successful African women without immediate detection and response. The numbers were staggering, but the personal stories were even more powerful. Women who had been saved from financial ruin, families protected from manipulation, young entrepreneurs warned away from predators who would have destroyed their dreams. The lawsuit against us was dismissed in the final court this morning, Bukola added. The judge ruled that protecting women from financial crimes couldn't be classified as economic terrorism, no matter how effectively we did it. Adunni's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number, and for a moment, the old fear flickered through her chest. But when she opened it, she saw something that made her smile. It was from a woman in Ghana. "Thank you. Your network warned me about a man who had been courting me for months. I discovered he was using the exact same tactics Kimi used on you. You saved my life and my business. How can I help other women?" The message was followed by dozens of others, women offering resources, sharing information, volunteering to help build and strengthen the network that had grown far beyond what any of them had imagined possible. "You know what the strangest part is?" Adunni said, looking around at the faces of the women who had become her closest family through the worst period of her life. "Kimi thought my success made me vulnerable. He saw my achievements as weaknesses to exploit, my love as manipulation opportunities, my independence as something that needed to be controlled. And instead, it made you unstoppable," Folktales said softly. "It made us all unstoppable," Adunni corrected. "Because he never understood that successful women don't exist in isolation. We exist in networks of mutual support, shared resources, and collective strength. When he attacked one of us, he attacked all of us." Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Adunni could see the bustling streets of Lagos, millions of people building their lives and pursuing their dreams. Somewhere among them were other women facing the same challenges they had overcome, other families dealing with betrayal and manipulation, other success stories being targeted by those who saw achievement as vulnerability. But now, they weren't alone. "So what's next?" Ngozi asked. Adunni smiled, thinking of all the plans they had discussed, all the ways they could expand the network, all the women they could still save. "Now we keep building. We keep protecting. We keep proving that the mocked child who carries the burden of the house isn't a victim, she's a force of nature." Her phone rang with another call from a woman in distress, another opportunity to turn tragedy into triumph, another chance to prove that success shared was success multiplied. As she answered the call, Adunni caught her reflection in the window and saw something she hadn't seen in years, a woman who was not just successful, but powerful. Not just independent, but dangerous to anyone who would prey on others. The mocked child who had carried the burden of the house had grown into something her enemies had never expected, a leader of other strong women who refused to carry anyone else's burdens but their own. "African Women's Security Network," she said into the phone. "You're not alone anymore." The woman on the other end began to cry with relief, and Adunni knew that somewhere, another predator was about to discover that the game had changed forever. This concludes our story of strength, sisterhood, and the power of women who refuse to be victims. What lessons from Adunni's journey resonate most with you? Share this story with other strong women in your life, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more inspiring tales of resilience and revenge. Comment below, what would you have done in Adunni's situation? Your support helps us continue bringing these powerful stories to light.